brethren in Garden City. We are starting a series on Married for Life, and we're going to have some exciting things. Next week we have baby dedications, and some will be bringing their babies or their young children to be dedicated. We've got some other things. Mother's Day's the following week. We've got some really neat things planned. So just want to encourage everyone as we start this new series today, because every marriage begins with the important thing is a good beginning. So today we're going to talk about boy meets girl. You've got an outline in your bulletin today. I recently read that some children aged 5 to 10 were asked several questions about marriage, and here are a few of their responses. When asked what is the proper age to get married, Judy, age 8, said 84. Because you're retired and you can spend more time on romance. Tom, age 5, said, when I'm done with kindergarten, I'm finding me a wife. They were asked, what do most people do on their first date? Mike, age 7, said on the first date they usually just tell each other lies, and that usually gets them interested on a second date. When asked why two people particularly fall in love with each other, Jan, age 9, said, no one is sure what happens, but I've been told it has something to do with how you smell. That's why perfume and deodorant are so popular. So where do kids get this stuff? They get it from their parents, who are as mystified as the kids are about dating. So we are talking about Married for Life, and you're going to find out this church is serious about marriage. We want the strongest marriages that we can. So things today and throughout this entire series are designed to help us be better husbands and wives, and those of us who are in the room who are looking or online that are looking for a spouse, I hope today gives you some insights. Did you ever get any coaching about how to know the right person to spend your life with? My mom said to me, Bobby, date a lot of girls, and when you find the right one, you'll know it. Well, I did that. It took me a long time, but I found the right one. She was right, but that's not always the best advice possible. 90% of us at some time in our life are going to get married. And I realize that most in the room are already married. But there are some singles here, and there are a few people that are in the dating process. And most of us have kids or grandkids that are in the dating process. And I hope that you'll share some of this, what I think is really solid stuff about dating, that we can share that with them. So how would you advise your child or grandchild or a friend who's looking to make the second most important decision in their life? The first and most important decision they're going to make is, who am I going to spend eternity with? And that's Jesus Christ. The second most important question they're going to make is, who is the right person for me to marry? Who is the right person for me to spend the rest of my life? The Bible has a lot to say about marriage. It started with Adam and Eve in the garden, and it ends in Revelation with Christ receiving his church as his bride. I want to read some passages from Proverbs. I want to just tell you, these passages are straightforward. They're unvarnished. I'm going to be reading them in the Message translation. Barb will have them up on the screen. But I want to tell you, they come with a warning. And basically what the writer of Proverbs is saying is, you need to be very careful about the person you choose to marry. Let's look at Proverbs 15:17. In the Message, it reads, Better a bread crust shared in love than a slab of prime meat served in hate. Some of us know what it's like to have a nice, intimate dinner in a beautiful restaurant. The setting is beautiful, the candles are beautiful, the food is beautiful, and the conversation is silent. We're looking at each other like, what in the world are we doing here? There's no communication at all. Proverbs 25:24 in the Message says, better to live life alone in a tumble-down shack than to share a mansion with a nagging spouse. I didn't write it, I'm just reading it, folks. That's pretty straightforward. Better to live alone in a tumble-down shack than a mansion with a nagging spouse. But it gets even better. Proverbs 21:19. It's better to live in a tent in the wild than with a cross and petulant spouse. The wisdom of Proverbs is very straightforward. Don't mess it up, folks. Let's get serious about who we're choosing to spend the rest of our life with. You're better off eating breadcrumbs or better off being in a tent in the wild or a rundown shack than to be in a binding marriage with the wrong person. So how do we know what kind of stuff we're going to face in marriage? Well, it's about making choices. All of life is about making choices. Now, I'm going to date myself. Some of you are in my vintage, so you can appreciate this. But in 1984, we lived in Portland, Oregon, and the National Basketball Association was holding their draft. And the teams with the worst record in that previous year got to pick in the order of their record. Well, Portland and Houston, the Houston Rockets, they tied. So they flipped a coin. Now everybody knew that whoever won the coin toss was going to pick Hakeem Olajuwon. Houston won the coin flip. They picked Hakeem Olajuwon. Happened to be from the University of Houston. Big, tall, 7-foot guy. Went on to have a magnificent NBA career, Hall of Fame player. Portland chose next. They needed a big guy. So they chose Sam Bowie out of the University of Kentucky. Wonderful guy, 7'1", with legs as brittle as a 90-year-old man. He spent all of his career on the bench with broken legs and broken bones and never had a significant career at all. Chicago picks number 3. Now, don't put it up there yet, Barb. Who do you think they picked? Who? Michael Jordan. Why would you pick Sam Bowie over Michael Jordan? Now, those of you who don't know anything about basketball, let me just say Michael Jordan's the greatest basketball player of all time, even today. I don't care about LeBron. Michael Jordan's the greatest basketball player of all time. In fact, he was named the greatest athlete in the 1900s. A fabulous basketball player. Now, we didn't need Michael Jordan. We had Clyde Drexler, but they chose Sam Bowie. They made the wrong choice. They spent millions of dollars deciding on which player to choose. I wouldn't want to be the general manager for the Portland Trail Blazers that picked Sam Bowie over Michael Jordan. Trust me, he's not there today. He wasn't there 2 years later. He was fired. They spend millions of dollars trying to figure out how to make the right choice. The same is true for us when we're trying to decide who we're going to marry. We need to make sure that we don't end up with a Sambui of life. And by the way, Sambui's a wonderful man. He's a very good man. Does a lot of good things. And I'm not knocking Sambui, but in the realm of basketball player, he doesn't hold a candle to Michael Jordan. I would like to suggest that we make 8 lethal mistakes when we make the choice of who we want to marry. So that it is point 1. Actually, you've always been waiting for a 1-point sermon. This is a 1-point sermon with 8 subpoints. Okay? Next thing you're waiting for is, well, I should say, it reminds me of the preacher that said, in light of last week's 26-point sermon, this week's sermon will be pointless. This is not point. That's a joke. This is not pointless. 1 point. 8 fatal, lethal mistakes we make in getting married. Number A, getting married too quickly. Getting married too quickly. I have a roommate in college who got engaged 23 days after his first date with his girlfriend. They married. A year and a half later, he was one of the groomsmen in my wedding with Brenda. And he shows up, he's in seminary in Phillips University in Enid, Oklahoma. He shows up at our wedding in Wichita, and there's no wife. And I said, "Where's your wife?" He said, "Oh, we divorced a year ago." The marriage didn't even last a year. I would urge everyone who is dating to slow down and make sure you're making the right decision. Take your time. Get it right. Get it right. Now, I'm not saying, and I want to say this is true for all of the 8 points that I'm going to give. There are exceptions for every rule. There are exceptions. There are people who have dated very little and gotten married and had very successful marriages. But the odds are not in your favor when you marry someone you have not spent time with. Your odds are not in favor if most of your dating is by texting or emails, or in my day and time, by letter writing. The odds are not in your favor. I think the dating process is important. It helps us to get to know who that person is, whether they are the right person for us to marry. B, marrying too young. You wouldn't let a 2-year-old handle a steak knife. You probably wouldn't put an 8-year-old behind the steering wheel of a car unless you were Opal Wishon, and she would do that. But if you were at her funeral, you heard me talk about putting Brian behind the wheel at 10 and go faster, punch it, Brian. This is the most important decision of your life. Maturity matters. 45% of all marriages end in divorce. The highest percentage of those who divorce are those who are married before the age of 18. The highest percentage, it's not even close. If they haven't even graduated from high school, if they've never graduated from high school, never even went on and got their GED, and I'm not knocking education, folks, okay? I watched my dad at age 51 go get his high school diploma. So I'm not knocking people who drop out of high school because of situations and then go back and get it. But I am telling you, the statistics are very much against an 18-year-old getting married. Again, there are exceptions. We all know them. Psychiatrists say that up until the age 25, most of us are still learning to process life. We're not ready to get married. Bottom line is, make sure you're grown up before you get married. Now, I want to tell you an exception to the rule, and this is as bizarre an exception to the rule as you could have ever heard. So when Brenda and I were in East Tennessee in seminary, we preached in 2 different churches there. And in one of the churches there was this wonderful, wonderful couple, and it was obvious that he was quite a bit older than her, and she was in her 60s. Her husband was in his 70s. They had a 47-year-old son, so that meant he was born in like 1929. Just put things in perspective for that day and time, okay? She told me kind of sheepishly one day, she said, "You know that Grant's quite a bit older than me." And I said, "Yeah, I know that, figured that." And she said, "He was 26 when we got married, and I was 13. Wow, yeah, you got the same thing I did. Wow, today you would go to prison for that, honestly. Their marriage worked. They were an exception to the rule. They also were very devout Christians, and they committed their marriage to Christ, and I think that was a significant reason as to why, even though there was such a disparity in age and she was so very, very young, that their marriage survived. All right, C. Don't get too eager to marry. When we get too eager to marry, sometimes we feel peer pressure. We got to get married. We got to get married. We got to get married. Everybody's getting married. They say to you, "Why are you not married?" If you're a single bachelor in the room, you probably have been asked hundreds of times, "Why haven't you ever married?" I have a friend named David. Wonderful friend. He and I graduated together in 1971 and from Bible college, and he did not want to be one of the 4 of us. I was one of the 4. He didn't want to be one of the 4 that was graduating and wasn't married. So as quickly as possible, he found a girl and he married her. We both waited a year before we went to seminary. We got to East Tennessee to seminary. He is introducing me to his wife. And I'm going, "You got to be kidding me." He married the first person he came across. Now remember, he was studying for ministry. This lady drank like a fish, smoked and cussed like a sailor, and it was a disaster. And after the first semester, he went home, took her home to Oregon. They divorced. It was absolutely a disaster. He felt so pressured to marry her. He went on the police force and married then a wonderful lady. We count them as some of our closest and best friends. But he felt pressured. Pressured to get married. Don't let people pressure you to get married. Don't be eager to marry. All right, D. When you have too few shared experiences. You need to share life together. And I'm not talking about living together. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm talking about dating each other enough that you know when you go through a tough time how that person's going to handle it. Don't just marry them because they look good or they have a great job. Here's how it goes. You tell me if I'm wrong. When a girl goes on her first date and she goes back to her girlfriends, what do they want to know? Does he have a job? What kind of job does he have? When a guy goes on a date and he comes back to his friends, to tell them about the first date, what's the first thing they want to know? What does she look like? What does she look like? We don't care about how functionable she is. What does she look like? 1 Samuel 16:17. The Lord has some things to say about it. The Lord said to Samuel, don't look, this is the choosing of a king. The same goes true in choosing a spouse. Do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. It's all about their heart. When you begin to share experiences in life in the dating process, you find out how much integrity they have, how much honesty they have. You find out how they treat each other, how they treat people in the real world. You find out what their values are. You find out what sort of spiritual commitment they have. Wait till you have some shared experiences, because then you'll know what's on the inside, because that's honestly all that matters. The outside is the outside, folks. E. Too tied to our parents and families. Don't get married to please your parents. Sometimes we are so tied to our parents or families, we can't function as a married couple. We can't give ourselves fully to the spouse because the family keeps getting in the way. You know where it is. Some of you may have experienced that. Don't let parents put guilt on you either. I have a friend, I will call his name Fred. I wish I were making this up. I'm not. I'm not even exaggerating. Fred's daughter was giving birth to their first grandchild in another state. Fred, who is in his 40s, asked his mother and father, who he's not living with, he lives with his wife, he asked his mother and father for permission to go on vacation, to go down to see his granddaughter be born. Mom said, I don't know that you can afford it right now, Fred. I'm not making that up, folks. Genesis 2:24 says, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast, or the old translation says, cleave to his wife, and they shall become one. It means to leave your family and be committed to your wife. Now, we know another family in East Tennessee. We lived in the Hicks, but we lived in the sticks with the hillbillies. Okay, we did. Well, I'm just going to be honest with you. We had spittoons in the church. They grew tobacco in front of the parsonage. That's where we lived. Okay, so in the other church we were in East Tennessee, true story, we met this couple. They were engaged, and I said, well, when are you going to get married? Well, we're not going to get married till each of our mothers has died. And I said, how long have you been engaged? 23 years. We're on our second wedding ring, engagement ring. And by the way, you really would want that young lady, because she was quite a piano player. She was a pianist for the church. True story, folks. I'm not making this stuff up. We get so tied to our families, we never let our marriage get a chance to be going. All right, F. We have unrealistic expectations of the future. Some of us get married, we think all of our problems are solved. Let me just tell you, nothing could be further from the truth. 1 Corinthians 7:28 says, but if you do marry, you have not sinned, and if a betrothed woman marries, she has not sinned. Yet those who marry will have worldly troubles, and I would spare you that. Some of us are going to face unbelievable things in our marriages. And I don't have permission to say this, but I'm going to say it, and I know it will be okay. When Miss Opal passed away here a few weeks ago, I got the obituary from Garnan's, and I immediately called Diane, and I said, Diane, I said, this says there's another daughter besides Beverly that died. She said, yes, Mom and Dad, their very first child went full term and was stillborn. And her exact words to me were, can you imagine the excitement of the expectation of your first child being born and the devastation to know that the baby is dead? Am I right, Diane? It's exactly what she told me. We have this pie in the sky expectation. We get married, everything is going to be a piece of cake. There are not going to be any problems. There's not going to be health issues. There are not going to be financial issues. There's not going to be whatever issues. Do not live in a world with unrealistic expectations. Every couple I marry, I ask them, what are your expectations? What are your expectations of your husband-to-be or your bride-to-be? All right, G. One or both of you are unhealthy. When you buy a car today, you can get a thing. Don and I were talking about this earlier today. When you buy a car today, you can get a thing called a Carfax. And it will tell everything you need to know about that car. You can buy your car today with your eyes wide open. Don't you wish that you knew everything about the person you're about to marry? Now, I'm not going to suggest to you that you go get a KBI investigation of them. I love a TV show called Bull, and one of the ladies on that show did a background check on the guy she was dating. It did not go well. Let me just put it that way. Every one of us has had our heart broken. And I put a little note in my sermon. I just added it in there. If we didn't have broken hearts, there would be no need for country music. Amen. But you know what, folks? You need to know if they have character flaws. You need to know if they have integrity issues or if there's anything flaky about sexual issues. I'm going to tell you right now, if you're a codependent, and there's some of us in the room, I count myself as one. My greatest joy is trying to fix people. I'm just going to tell you, you can't fix them. Don't think you can marry them and fix them, because you can't. You can't do it. All right, H. Marry total opposites. The old saying is opposites attract. That is absolutely false. When I do premarital counseling, I often use a computer program called Prepare and Enrich. It's a really neat program. Each person in the couple does it, answers several questions, and then they send it in, and the computer spits out to them and to me, gives me more detail than it does them. It points out the areas where they are similar and the areas where they are not similar. And those are called red flags, folks. We're looking for similarities, not red flags. The greater the similarities, the greater chance the marriage will last. That is doubly so in spiritual life. I want to read for you a passage that most of us in this room have heard before. 2 Corinthians 6:14. It's actually the passage I had Karen put as the scripture, even though it's the last one I'm reading. I'm going to read it from the Message. Now let me just tell you, when Eugene Peterson wrote the Message, he wasn't messing around. He's pretty blunt about what he says. Okay? So let me read 2 Corinthians 6:14 in the Message. We remember the passage about don't be unequally yoked. That's the passage, okay? Here's what Eugene Peterson writes. Don't become partners with those who reject God. How can you make a partnership out of right and wrong? That's not partnership, that's war. Wow. And I'm going to tell you, don't think you're going to convert your spouse, your future spouse, to your spiritual position. Does it happen? Yes, it does. I am so grateful that every Sunday I can walk out of church and my wife and I can talk about what we talked about in church because we share the same spiritual connection. But I want to tell you, I know people who are listening today who can't go home and talk about Jesus Christ. Or can't talk about anything that we ever talk about in the realm of Christianity because their spouse doesn't want to hear it. They married him thinking they could change him. And are there exceptions to the rule? Absolutely. Talked to Carol Canal. She prayed for 22 years. Finally, Carl accepted Christ. All right, let's get to the conclusion. Today, the most important thing that you need to know, and everything we're going to talk about the next 4 or 5 weeks, the most important thing you need to know is that at the Church of the Brethren, we take marriage serious. We want to provide whatever tools we can to help every person in our church community in their marriage. And that's the conclusion. We take marriage seriously around here. Now I'm going to tell you how seriously we take it. The final sermon is going to be called Sacred Promises. And on that Sunday, May 22nd, put it on your calendar, I'm inviting every couple that would like to renew their vows to join me on stage, and we're going to have a wedding ceremony. Now, I will tell you, I got permission. I talked to Vaughn. He said, count Connie and me in. And then I thought, I better talk to the nurture chairman, because she has something to say about what we do in worship. So I called Diane, and her exact words were, Max and I are going on vacation, but we are not going on vacation now. We will be there. An hour later, and I can put the picture on Facebook if you want. An hour later, Max sends me a picture. He said, she's already got the dress picked out for the wedding. The next text from her says, I just sent a text to all 3 of my sons. So I'm inviting all of you to come and join us up here. I will tell you, you might want to come with a camera. The preacher is not going to wear a Hawaiian shirt. I've already ordered a tuxedo. Woo! So we're going to renew our vows. And then we're going to have cake and punch and whatever Diane's got figured out back there. It's going to be a fabulous, fabulous service. I don't know how many people, we may have them down here, but we're going to do a wedding. And we're going to renew our vows to our spouses. We're going to do everything we can in these next 4 or 5 weeks to gain some tools to make our marriages better and better and better and better. And this is just the beginning, as we talked about boy meets girl. All right. It's time for our closing song. It's a wonderful... I thought about it as I was looking at the bulletin. I didn't realize we're talking about getting married, and, you know, some people in the room are saying, well, you know, I hope God can provide a way for me to get married. Well, the song we're going to sing is Waymaker, so if you can see the humor in that. Wasn't picked for that reason. But I want us to be serious.